A wealthy white woman, used to getting her way, boards a first-class flight and decides a black man doesn't belong in the seat next to her. She tries to have him removed, flexing her privilege and status. She's done it before, and it's always worked. But this man is different. He doesn't argue. He doesn't get angry. He simply asks one quiet question that changes everything. What did he say that made her blood run cold and turn her world upside down at 30,000 feet? Get ready for a story of instant karma and a lesson in humility that you won't soon forget. Before we witness this powerful moment of truth, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The boarding. The gate area for Airline's Flight 107 to New York was a microcosm of modern hustle. Students scrolled on phones. Families corralled children, and business travelers typed furiously, their focus a force field against the ambient noise. Among them, two figures stood in stark contrast. Chloe Vanderwell sat perfectly erect in the premium boarding lounge, a porcelain cup of steaming tea in her hand. At 42, she carried herself with the unshakable certainty of someone whose life had been a series of green lights. Her cream-colored designer suit was impeccable, her blonde hair a sharp, expensive bob. She was a partner at a boutique real estate firm, and her success was etched into her posture. To her, the world was a hierarchy, and she was comfortably near the top. She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch, a silent sigh of impatience. She just wanted to get on the plane, have a glass of champagne, and sleep. Across the lounge, Dave Okoro scrolled through a technical schematic on his tablet. At 45, he had a calm, grounded presence that seemed to quiet the chaos around him. Dressed in a well-tailored but understated navy blazer and dark jeans, he looked successful but not ostentatious. He was deeply focused, his brow slightly furrowed as he solved a complex problem for one of his company's new aircraft engines. David wasn't just a passenger. This flight and this airline was his domain. He was the founder and CEO of Aura Airlines, a fact known to his employees but invisible to everyone else. Now boarding first class and Aura Platinum Elite members, the gate agent announced, her voice crisp over the intercom. Chloe stood smoothly, collecting her purse and carry-on. She fell into line, her heels clicking a rhythm of entitlement on the polished floor. David, finishing an email, stood and followed, a polite smile offered to the agent who recognized him, but, catching a subtle shake of the head, simply said, "Welcome aboard, sir." The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. Plush gray seats, ambient lighting, and the soft clink of glasses. Chloe found her seat, 2A, a window. She stored her bag with practiced efficiency and settled in, already claiming the armrest and the space around her. David slid into the aisle seat next to her, 2B. He offered a small, polite nod before returning to his tablet. Chloe's eyes flicked over him. No obvious luxury watch. No designer logos. His calm demeanor read, to her, not as confidence, but as a man who was pleasantly out of his depth. A assumption, swift and unquestioned, solidified in her mind. He must have used miles for an upgrade, she thought. Or maybe he's a professional athlete. No, too old. Probably just got lucky. A flight attendant, a young man named Ben with a warm demeanor, approached. "Welcome aboard. Folks, can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Champagne orange juice." "Champagne. Thank you," Chloe said, not making eye contact, already dismissing him. "Just still water for me, please," David said, his voice a low, warm baritone. He looked up and gave Ben a genuine smile. "Big day ahead." "Of course, sir," Ben said, his demeanor shifting almost imperceptibly into something more attentive. Chloe didn't notice. As Ben left, Chloe's phone buzzed. She took the call, speaking loudly about a multi-million-dollar deal, her voice designed to impress anyone within earshot. David subtly put on noise-canceling headphones, not out of rudeness, but to grant her privacy. She wasn't claiming herself. The plane finished boarding. The cabin door hissed shut, and the gentle thrum of the engines began. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Chloe ended her call. She looked at the man next to her, now fully immersed in his work. She cleared her throat. He didn't hear her over his headphones and his focus. She tapped him, not gently, on the arm. David paused his music and slid one headphone off. Yes? Can I help you? Chloe offered a tight, perfunctory smile. I think you might be in the wrong seat. The assumption. David Okoro blinked, processing the woman's words. They weren't delivered as a question, but as a statement of fact. A slight, bemused smile touched his lips. I'm quite sure I'm in 2B, he said calmly, tapping his boarding pass on his phone screen. Would you like to see? Chloe waved a dismissive hand, her long, manicured nails flashing. No, I don't need to see. It's just that this is first class. She said it slowly, as if explaining a basic concept to a child. David's smile remained, but it cooled a few degrees. He understood the subtext, a language he was unfortunately fluent in. He'd heard it in boardrooms before he was famous, in luxury stores, in the subtle ways people try to put him in a box. He chose to play naive, to give her an exit she wouldn't take. It certainly is, he agreed, his tone pleasant. Very comfortable seats. Frustration flickered in Chloe's eyes. He wasn't taking the hint. She was a woman who dealt in directness, especially with people she perceived as beneath her. Look, she said, leaning in and lowering her voice, though not enough. I fly this route twice a month. I know how this works. These seats are for Aura Platinum Elites or full-fare passengers. I think there's been a mistake. Perhaps you should double-check with the staff. Her words were coded in a faux concern that was utterly transparent. The tension in the space between their seats became palpable. David could feel the eyes of the passenger across the aisle on them. The quiet hum of the cabin seemed to grow louder. He took a slow breath. The patience he'd honed over years of building a company from the ground up now being called upon for a much smaller, more personal test. The staff checked my boarding pass at the gate, he stated, his voice even. I assure you I'm supposed to be here. Chloe's jaw tightened. This wasn't going according to script. In her experience, people usually folded under this kind of quiet pressure. They got flustered, apologized, and moved. This man's unshakable calm was infuriating. She decided to escalate. Ben, the flight attendant, was walking down the aisle, checking seat belts. Chloe seized her opportunity. She raised her hand, snapping her fingers twice in the air. Excuse me, steward. David flinched internally at the term. His employees were flight attendants, professionals, not stewards. Ben approached, his professional mask firmly in place, though his eyes flickered at David for a split second. Yes, ma'am? Is everything all right? No, it's not, Chloe said, her voice syrupy with manufactured distress. I believe this gentleman is in the incorrect seat. He seemed confused. Could you please assist him? I'd really like to relax, and this is all a bit unsettling before takeoff. She layered on the vulnerability, a weapon she wielded with precision. Ben's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He looked at David, who gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a clear command. Play along. I can check, ma'am, Ben stammered, playing his part. He looked at David. Sir, may I see your boarding pass? David handed over his phone. Ben made a show of looking at it, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew exactly who David was. The entire crew had been briefed that the CEO was on board, incognito, returning from an unpublicized industry summit. This appears to be an order, ma'am, Ben said, handing the phone back. He is assigned to 2B. Chloe's face flushed a deep pink. The public rebuttal was a sting to her pride. Her carefully constructed reality was being challenged, and she wouldn't have it. The mask of civility slipped entirely. This is ridiculous, she hissed, her voice low and venomous, meant only for Ben and David. I pay a fortune to fly with this airline to avoid situations like this. I demand you do something. Check the manifest again. There must be a mistake. He does not belong here. The words hung in the air, toxic and unambiguous. He does not belong here. Ben looked terrified, his eyes darting to David for guidance. The other passengers were now openly staring, the silence in the cabin deafening. David finally moved. He slowly removed his other headphone and set his tablet down on his lap. The calm on his face had solidified into something harder, more formidable. The friendly neighbor was gone, replaced by the CEO. He looked directly at Chloe, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent cabin. "Is there a problem with my presence here, ma'am?" he asked. The question was simple, but it was a trapdoor. He was giving her one final chance to walk back her blatant prejudice. But Chloe Vanderwell, blinded by entitlement and anger, didn't step back. She doubled down. "The problem," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "is that this airline clearly doesn't vet its first-class passengers properly. Now, I suggest you find your real seat before I make a formal complaint that gets you banned from this airline for good." A collective gasp was sucked from the passengers around them. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" David held her gaze for a long, silent moment. The aircraft began its acceleration down the runway, the force pushing them back into their seats. He didn't break eye contact. He then turned to the terrified flight attendant, Ben. "Ben," David said, his voice now projecting a calm, undeniable authority that seemed to change the very air pressure in the cabin. "Once we reach cruising altitude, please ask Captain Evans to step out of the cockpit. I'd like a word." Chloe's smug expression faltered. Captain Evans? How did this man know the captain's name? Ben just nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir. Immediately, sir." He practically fled to the galley. The plane lifted into the air, but Chloe Vanderwell's stomach was in a freefall. She stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the man beside her, the first cold trickle of doubt seeping into her fury. Who was he? The revelation. The climb to cruising altitude felt like an eternity for everyone in the first-class cabin. A thick, uncomfortable silence had descended, broken only by the roar of the engines. Passengers pretended to read magazines or stare out their windows, but their attention was laser-focused on seats 2A and 2B. Chloe Vanderwell sat rigidly, her champagne flute untouched on her tray table. The initial heat of her anger had cooled, replaced by a cold, squirming anxiety. The man's command, "Ask Captain Evans to step out." It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. It was the tone she used with junior employees. Who speaks to a flight crew like that? David Okoro had put his headphones back on, but he wasn't listening to anything. He was staring at his tablet, not seeing the schematics. He was deeply disappointed. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered this kind of prejudice, but it never got easier, especially not on his own airplane, a place he had built to be a symbol of modern, inclusive luxury. The irony was a bitter pill. The seatbelt sign pinged off with a cheerful chime that felt grotesquely out of place. Ben emerged from the galley almost instantly. He looked pale but resolute. He walked straight to David. "Mr. Okoro? Captain Evans is available when you're ready." Okoro. The name hit Chloe's ears, but it didn't immediately register. It was unfamiliar. She clung to the hope that he was just some mid-level executive who'd gotten cocky. David nodded, unclipping his seatbelt. Now it was fine. As he stood, every eye in the cabin followed him. He walked a few steps to the open cockpit door. Captain Evans, a man in his 50s with a crisp salt and pepper mustache, turned in his chair, a look of professional concern on his face. Then recognition dawned, followed by a warm, respectful smile. "Mr. Okoro, I didn't know you were on board." "Is everything all right?" the captain asked, his voice carrying clearly into the quiet cabin. "Mr. Okoro." The name echoed again. This time, Chloe's brain made a connection. Airlines. Founded by a Nigerian-American entrepreneur, David Okoro. She'd read a Forbes article about him. Her blood ran cold, freezing her in her seat. She watched, paralyzed, as David leaned casually against the cockpit doorway, speaking in a low tone to the captain. He wasn't angry. He was calm, conversational. He gestured slightly back toward the cabin. Captain Evans's expression shifted from welcome to seriousness. He nodded several times, his eyes flicking past David to where Chloe sat, then back to David with a look of understanding. David patted the captain on the shoulder, a gesture of easy familiarity, and turned to walk back to his seat. The casualness of that pat was more terrifying to Chloe than any outburst of anger could have been. It spoke of a relationship. It spoke of ownership. He didn't sit down immediately. He stood in the aisle, looking down at Chloe. The entire cabin held its breath. The suspense was a physical weight. "Miss Vanderwell," he said, his voice calm and clear, devoid of malice but also of warmth. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a problem. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding about whether I belong in this seat." Chloe could only stare, her mouth agape. Any word she might have had shriveled up in her throat. He continued, his gaze unwavering. "My name is David Okoro. I founded Airline 7 years ago. This aircraft," he said, making a slight gesture around the cabin, "is part of a fleet I own. This seat is one of several thousand I own. And every person on this flight, including you, is my guest." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. A passenger across the aisle actually brought a hand to their mouth. Another let out a soft, shocked whistle. Chloe felt the world tilt. The foundation of her identity, her wealth, her status, her perceived superiority, crumbled into dust right there in seat 2A. She was drowning in a wave of sheer, unadulterated humiliation. She had not only insulted a fellow passenger, she had insulted the king in his own castle. She had tried to have the owner of the entire airline thrown out of first class. David finally took his seat. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply looked at her, allowing the magnitude of her error to settle over her completely. Ben approached cautiously, a phone in his hand. "Mr. Okoro, I have the head of corporate security on the line for you." He's pulled up Ms. Vanderwell's passenger profile and loyalty history. Chloe's head snapped up. Corporate security? This wasn't just humiliation. It was escalation. David took the phone. "James?" "David." "Yes, I'm on 107. "Yes, that's the one." He listened for a moment, his eyes still on Chloe, who was now visibly trembling. "I see. 13 years as a platinum member. A lot of complimentary upgrades, it seems." The subtext was clear. "She's benefited from my company's generosity for over a decade." He listened again. No need for that. We'll be diverting the plane?" "Absolutely not. That's an overreaction and a waste of company resources." He was a calm center of the storm he had created. "Just note the incident in her file. And James? Suspend her Aura Platinum status, effective immediately. We'll review her future on our aircraft after a formal investigation." He handed the phone back to Ben. The finality of his words crushed her. Her platinum status. It was a symbol of her success, her constant companion, in a life of privilege. It was her identity. And with a few calm sentences, he had stripped it away. Tears of shame and fury welled in her eyes. She was trapped. At 30,000 feet, in a metal tube owned by the man she had just profoundly insulted, there was nowhere to run. The fallout, the rest of the flight passed in a suffocating bubble of shame for Chloe Vanderwell. The gentle hum of the aircraft, the soft chatter from the economy cabin that slowly resumed, the occasional offer of a drink from a now stoic Ben. It all felt like it was happening to someone else. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. She dared not move. She dared not look to her left, where David Okoro had returned to his work, his focus absolute, as if the seismic event that had just occurred was merely a minor distraction. His ability to move on was, in itself, the ultimate power move. She was utterly insignificant. Her mind raced, replaying the encounter in brutal, cringeworthy detail. Every word she had spoken, every dismissive wave of her hand, every ounce of contempt she had poured on him echoed in her head, now reframed by the devastating context of his identity. She didn't just see a black man in a seat. She saw a threat to her perceived social order and tried to crush it, and she had failed spectacularly. The other passengers didn't help. She could feel their stares, hot and judgmental, on the back of her neck. Whispers, though hushed, carried fragments she was sure were about her. Incredible, the sheer audacity. Serves her right, she saw a woman 2 rows ahead discreetly take a picture of her, probably to text her friend. She had become a meme in real time, a cautionary tale at 500 miles per hour. Ben brought David a fresh cup of coffee, addressing him as Mr. Okoro, with a deference that was now explained. He brought Chloe nothing, a silent snub that spoke volumes about where the crew's loyalties lay. David took a call on his headset. speaking in the calm, authoritative tones of a chief executive. The merger documents are on my desk, Maria. We'll finalize the terms when I land. Yes, tell the Singapore team I was impressed with their presentation. Each word was a hammer blow to Chloe's crumbling ego. This wasn't a man who'd gotten lucky. This was a man who commanded global deals while she was arguing about seat assignments. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into New York. We'll be on the ground at JFK in about 30 minutes. The weather is clear and, on behalf of Mr. Okoro and the entire crew, we thank you for choosing Aura Airlines. Chloe flinched. Even the captain wasn't on it. She was a villain in this story, and everyone knew it. As the plane began its descent, David finally turned to her. The expectation of a confrontation made her heart pound against her ribs. Was he going to lecture her? To demand an apology? She braced herself. But he didn't. His expression wasn't angry or smug. It was analytical, disappointed. That status you were so proud of, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it over the drone of the engines. It was built for people who represent a certain standard, not just of travel, but of character. Aura is about connection, about respect. He paused, letting the words sink in. You demonstrated today that you fundamentally misunderstand that. Your money was never the point. Your character was. It was the most devastating thing he could have said. He hadn't attacked her wealth. He had dismissed it as irrelevant. He had attacked her very essence, and he had done it with the brutal precision of a master strategist. He saw her, truly saw her, and found her lacking. The wheels of the plane touched down with shriek of rubber on tarmac, the reverse thrust roaring. The journey was over. But for Chloe, a new and more painful one was just beginning. The moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers stood and scrambled to retrieve their bags, but their movements were slow, deliberate. They were waiting to see what happened next. David stood, collecting his single carry-on from the overhead bin. He didn't look at Chloe again. He was already moving on to his next meeting, his next decision, his much larger world. As he moved toward the front, Ben was waiting for him by the door, holding a tablet. Sir, the car is ready on the tarmac. The press conference on the new biofuel initiative is in 90 minutes. Thank you, Ben, and thank you for your professionalism today. Please extend my thanks to the entire crew. A bonus will reflect my appreciation, David said, before exiting the aircraft, leaving the toxic atmosphere behind him. Chloe remained seated, frozen. She was the last person in first class. She had to will her legs to move. As she finally stood to leave, she avoided every eye, her face burning with humiliation, so complete it felt like a physical brand. She had boarded the plane as Chloe Vanderwell, Platinum Elite. She was leaving as Chloe Vanderwell, the woman who tried to fire the boss. The landing, the walk through the jetway, felt like a perp walk. Chloe kept her head down, sunglasses on despite the dim interior lighting, hoping to become invisible. She could feel the lingering stares from her fellow first-class passengers who were waiting at the baggage carousel she would now have to avoid. She powered through the terminal, a ghost in a cream-colored suit, desperate for the anonymity of a taxi line. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her purse. Texts from colleagues. Did you land? Big meeting with the VPs tomorrow. Each notification was a mockery. How could she walk into a boardroom and command authority after the complete absence of it she had just displayed? She finally slid into the back of a yellow cab, the familiar smell of old leather and air freshener offering a small sense of shelter. Manhattan, she mumbled. As the cab pulled into the chaotic traffic of JFK, her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email. The sender address made her stomach lurch. Aura Airlines Corporate Communications, norply@aurair.com. With a trembling finger, she opened it. It was not a personal email. It was a mass corporate newsletter sent to all Platinum Elite members. The headline screamed, Aura Airlines reaffirms core values, respect, dignity, and inclusion for all. It felt like a targeted missile. She scanned the text, each word a fresh wound. At Aura Airlines, our loyalty program is built on a foundation of mutual respect. Our Platinum Elite status is not just a benefit. It is a promise to embody the highest standards of conduct. We are committed to providing a safe and welcoming environment for every guest and employee, regardless of race, gender, or background. Any behavior that violates these core principles may result in a review and potential revocation of membership privileges. It was a direct response to what had happened. It had to be. The timing was too perfect, the language too specific. David Okoro hadn't just punished her privately. He had used the corporate machinery to send a message to his entire customer base, with her incident as the unspoken catalyst. Her humiliation was now corporate policy. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool window. The city skyline rose in the distance, a forest of achievement and success she no longer felt a part of. The cab ride was a vortex of self-reckoning. For the first time, she wasn't just embarrassed. She was forced to reflect. She thought of all the times she'd used her status to subtly or not so subtly belittle waitstaff, receptionists, assistants, and fellow passengers she deemed unimportant. She had built her identity on a pedestal of perceived superiority, and today, David Okoro hadn't just knocked her off it. He had shown her the pedestal was an illusion all along. He hadn't needed to scream. He hadn't needed to have her arrested. He simply revealed the truth of his power and the poverty of her character, and then he let the consequences do the work. It was the most effective lesson in humility she had ever received. Weeks later, a formal letter arrived at her office. It was on heavy, embossed Aura Airline stationery. It thanked her for her past loyalty and formally notified her that her Platinum Elite status had been permanently revoked due to a serious violation of the Aura Airlines Code of Conduct. A standard cold corporate kiss-off. She never flew Aura again. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing one of their planes, let alone stepping foot on one. She paid a small fortune to book last-minute flights on their competitors. But the cost was more than financial. The story, as these stories do, had a way of getting out. A vague, tantalizing rumor about a real estate hotshot who messed with the wrong guy on an airplane circulated in her industry. She noticed colleagues looking at her a little differently, meetings where her authority was questioned just a bit more quickly. David Okoro, meanwhile, gave an interview to a major business magazine. The piece was about his airline's groundbreaking sustainability efforts. But toward the end, the reporter asked him about company culture. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect." Okoro was quoted as saying, "Title and wealth are not an excuse for poor character. In fact, they demand better character." We recently had to part ways with a long-term customer who couldn't grasp that simple idea. It was a reminder that our values aren't just words on a wall. They are the reason we fly. Chloe read the article in her empty apartment. She finally understood. She wasn't just a woman who lost a seat argument. She was a footnote in the story of a man who built an empire on respect. She was a cautionary tale that proved his point. And in the end, that was the most transformative lesson of all. True power isn't about claiming a seat. It's about owning the entire airline and the dignity to never have to prove it.